The alien Colosseum trembled with the roar of a beast. Massive and feral, the creature called Varric strained against titanium chains, its scaled body reflecting the artificial light of 1,000 stars. Across the arena floor stood Ethan Cole, a human engineer far from home, his wrists bound with glowing restraints. Blood trickled from a cut above his eye. The crowd of alien spectators, beings twice his height, with luminous blue eyes, screamed for resolution. Above them all, on a crystalline balcony, Emperor Thalrax rose to his full height, his voice booming across the chamber. This human laughed in the face of my daughter. Now he must choose kill this sacred beast or die alongside it. Ethan's eyes met those of the creature. In them, he saw not mindless aggression, but intelligence and suffering. He'd faced death before in the deserts of Iraq, but never like this, never so far from Earth. The princess watched from her father's side, her silver hair floating as if suspended in water. Her eyes betrayed nothing, but her fingers gripped the railing with unusual tension. As Ethan took a step toward the beast, the scene dissolved into blackness. 5 days earlier, the galactic arena of Klein floated in the orbit of a twin star system like a massive jewel catching fire. Inside its labyrinthine corridors, Ethan Cole worked alone near the edge of a ceremonial stage. Holographic emitters lined the polished floor, their inner workings exposed as he methodically checked each circuit. His hands moved with practiced precision, the muscle memory of 15 years spent fixing things others couldn't understand. At 58, Ethan's face bore the quiet confidence of a man who had seen the worst of humanity during the Gulf War and survived to build something after. The small scar that traced his right temple disappeared into salt and pepper hair, cropped short in the same military style he'd worn since his days in Delta Force. That part of his life was behind him now, locked away like the service medal he kept in his quarters. These days, he was just another engineer, contracted to fix the arena's holographic light grid before the royal parade began. He adjusted his work light to better illuminate the control panel. The Klein technology was impressive, decades beyond Earth's capabilities, but not without flaws. As an engineer who'd once helped retrofit NASA equipment, he could appreciate their advancements while spotting their weaknesses. A shadow fell across his tools. Ethan glanced up to see one of the Emperor's guards towering over him, armor gleaming like liquid metal. "Be invisible, human. The royal procession begins soon." The guard's translated voice crackled through its helmet. "You were instructed to complete repairs before the ceremony." Ethan nodded with practiced deference. "Almost finished." He'd learned that minimizing conversation with the Klein was the smartest strategy. Their society valued strength above all, and Earth, having only established diplomatic relations 5 years ago, was considered a backwater planet of weaklings. The guard moved on heavy boots, leaving perfect indentations in the polished floor. Around Ethan Klein, officials bustled in preparation, their blue skin catching the light of a dozen artificial suns that hung suspended in the arena's vast dome. Ethan returned to the circuitry, but his mind worked on multiple tracks, assessing the room, the exits, the behavior patterns of the guards. Old habits from special ops training never quite faded. The Klein might consider humans weak, but they'd never seen Delta Force operators navigate hostile territory. They'd never witnessed what Earth soldiers could accomplish when outgunned and outnumbered. As he closed the access panel, Ethan noticed something concerning. The power fluctuations in the holographic grid showed a distinct pattern. He pulled out his diagnostic tool, running a quick analysis. The results confirmed his suspicion the system had a critical design flaw. Under certain conditions, the energy routing could overload, potentially causing a catastrophic failure during the ceremony. "This could be dangerous," he muttered, checking the time. 20 minutes before the ceremony began, not enough to implement a proper fix, but perhaps enough to create a temporary bypass. He reached deeper into the panel, rerouting critical power junctions with the speed of someone who'd defused bombs under gunfire. From above, a low hum began to build. The Klein spectators were taking their seats, thousands of them filling the curved walls of the arena. Their conversations created a sound like distant ocean waves rising and falling in alien cadence. Ethan worked faster, sweat beading on his forehead. The emergency bypass would hold for a few hours, long enough for the ceremony to conclude safely. After that, the entire system would need an overhaul. He'd file a report, but whether the Klein would listen to a human's assessment was another matter entirely. With 5 minutes to spare, he sealed the panel and gathered his tools. As he stood to leave, a Klein official approached, dressed in ceremonial robes that shimmered with embedded technology. "You, human engineer, remain here. The official pointed to a position near the edge of the stage. "Stand there. Do not move until the ceremony concludes." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he nodded. This wasn't part of his assignment, but arguing with Klein officials had consequences. He'd seen another human contractor deported last month for showing insufficient respect. The man had simply questioned an instruction. Taking his position, Ethan stood straight, hands clasped behind his back, parade rest as it had been called in his military days. Around him, towering Klein guards with glowing blue eyes prepared for the Emperor's arrival. Each stood twice his height, with skin like polished marble and armor that seemed alive, shifting with their movements. The lights dimmed gradually. The crowd fell silent. The air smelled of ozone and anticipation. When the drums of this Klein empire echoed through the chamber, Ethan felt them in his chest more than heard them. A rhythmic pulsing that synchronized with heartbeats, an ancient sound weaponized through technology. The massive doors at the far end of the arena slid open, revealing blinding light. From within that radiance emerged the royal family. At the center walked Princess Zura, the only daughter of Emperor Thalrax. Her beauty was unlike anything from Earth, tall and elegant, her silver hair floating as if underwater, defying gravity in the most mesmerizing way. Her ceremonial robes cascaded around her like liquid starlight. Behind her strode Emperor Thalrax, twice her height, his presence commanding absolute silence. His blue skin was deeper than the others, marked with luminescent patterns that signified his royal bloodline. Walking slightly behind Zura was a male Klein that Ethan recognized from intelligence briefings, Prince Vaughn, her betrothed. His posture exuded arrogance, his gaze sweeping the arena as if assessing property soon to be his. Every alien in the arena bowed low as the procession passed. Ethan followed suit, lowering his head in the way he'd been instructed during cultural orientation. The royal family proceeded toward the central dais, where 3 crystal thrones awaited. As Princess Zura passed near where Ethan stood, one of the robotic attendants flanking the procession misstepped. Its arm caught the trailing edge of her ceremonial robe. The princess stumbled slightly, not falling, just a tiny loss of balance, the kind of minor misstep anyone might make. But to Ethan, standing too close, intense from hours of delicate work, something about the moment struck a nerve. The princess, so revered and feared, suddenly seemed utterly human in her momentary gracelessness. A reflexive response escaped before he could stop it. He laughed, a small, nervous chuckle barely audible to himself. But in the perfect silence of the arena, that sound echoed like thunder. The procession froze. The guards turned as one, their blue eyes burning like distant stars. The rhythmic drums stopped mid-beat. Princess Zura straightened her expression, transforming from surprise to outrage. Ethan's face went pale as he realized what he'd done. His small instinctive chuckle had just insulted royalty before thousands of witnesses. He dropped his tool and raised his hand slightly. "I'm sorry, it was a mistake, I didn't mean." His voice shook, trailing off, as 2 armored guards stepped forward, their energy blades humming with deadly intent. The air in the arena grew heavy, charged with potential violence. Zura's gaze locked onto him, her eyes beginning to glow faintly, a sign of fury in her species. Then her voice came sharp and cold as space itself. "Human, do you find me amusing?" Ethan swallowed hard. "No, Your Highness, Silence?" she commanded, her voice echoing throughout the arena. "You dare laugh at Klein royalty?" At the far end of the hall, Emperor Thalrax rose from his golden throne. His voice was deep enough to make the floor vibrate. "A human dares to laugh at my bloodline." Everyone bowed again, pressing their foreheads to the floor. Ethan stood trembling, unable to move, caught in the Emperor's terrible gaze. The Emperor's eyes narrowed, glowing brighter. "In our law, laughter at royalty is not mockery. It is challenge or courtship." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. The crowd gasped. Murmurs spread like wind through summer grass. Ethan shook his head rapidly. "Wait, no courtship, no challenge. It was an accident." But the Emperor raised a hand, silencing him. "Then you must face the consequence of your own sound." Princess Zura tilted her head, her anger cooling into something sharper, more calculated. Her lips curved into a thin, dangerous smile. "Father, let the law decide. Let him prove his worth, or let him claim what he dared to challenge." Ethan blinked in confusion. "Prove my what?" The Emperor stood towering above them all. His voice rolled across the chamber. "By decree of the ancient code, this human shall undergo the trial of the fool. 7 tests of strength, wisdom, and heart. If he survives, he may stand beside my daughter. If he fails, his life is forfeit." The guards seized Ethan by the arms, their grip like iron vices. As they dragged him toward the exit, He struggled, shouting, "Wait, I just laughed. I don't want to marry anyone." The aliens ignored him. The audience erupted into whispers. Some laughed cruelly, others looked curious. Prince Vaughn's face contorted with fury, his eyes following Ethan with naked hatred. As Ethan was pulled away, Princess Zura stepped closer. Her glowing eyes calm now, almost amused. She leaned slightly toward him and whispered so only he could hear, "You think I am funny, human? Then survive and I might let you laugh again." Ethan's heart raced as he was dragged down long corridors made of crystal and light. The air smelled metallic and the guard said nothing. Only the echo of boots followed him through the alien architecture. Finally, they threw him into a cell made of glowing walls. The door sealed behind him with a soft hum, leaving him alone with his thoughts. He sat down heavily on a narrow platform that served as a bed, his hands trembling slightly. How could a reflexive laugh become a death sentence? Through a small viewport, he saw the vastness of space and the stars stretching forever. He thought of Earth, of how small and insignificant he was in this vast galaxy, of how insane and arbitrary alien customs could be. Somewhere above, music returned to the royal chamber. The ceremony continued as if nothing had happened, but Ethan Cole's life had changed forever. And far above, Princess Zura's smile lingered sharp and curious. She had seen something in that human's reaction, something unpredictable, something dangerous, something interesting. And for the first time in years, she wasn't bored. Ethan barely slept. The alien cell hummed softly around him, its walls shifting color every few seconds, like the surface of a strange sea. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard the Emperor's voice again. 7 trials, human. Prove your worth or perish. The words haunted him, echoing louder than the silence of space. He paced the small cell, measuring its dimensions, assessing its weaknesses, habits from his military days that surfaced automatically in confinement. At what passed for dawn aboard the Klein Royal flagship, the door to his cell melted open. 2 guards entered, tall and shining in armor that seemed alive, pulsing with faint blue energy that matched their glowing eyes. "The trial of the fool begins now," one said in a cold, mechanical tone. Ethan followed his heart pounding, but his face carefully composed. His engineer's jumpsuit felt thin and useless against the chill of the corridor. His mind, however, was already analyzing everything: the route they took, the security systems, the behavior patterns of the guards. If there was any chance of survival, it would come from observation and adaptation, the same skills that had kept him alive during covert operations. Every step led him deeper into the core of the ship, where the walls were lined with pulsating veins of blue energy. They passed other Klein who stopped to stare at the human prisoner. Some looked curious, others contemptuous. They marched him toward a massive chamber labeled in alien script. As the doors opened, Ethan saw the first challenge, the gravity sphere. The arena was a perfect sphere of floating platforms, suspended in midair, surrounded by a shimmering field of magnetic light. Each platform moved slowly, spinning at different angles. At the center, an orb of gravity energy pulsed like a heart. The space between platforms seemed to warp and bend, as if the normal rules of physics were merely suggestions here. High above, behind a transparent wall, the royal family watched. Emperor Thalrak stood like a mountain while Princess Zura sat beside him, her silver hair glowing softly under the artificial light. She looked calm, but her eyes followed every movement below with unusual intensity. Prince Vaughn stood slightly apart, his posture rigid with barely contained fury. A voice boomed across the chamber. The human laughed at the crown. Let him now face the weight of his own mockery. He will endure the pull of the stars, or he will be crushed beneath them. Ethan's breath quickened. The guards pushed him forward onto one of the floating platforms. Instantly, his feet grew heavy, as if massive weights had been attached to his boots. The gravity shifted violently, and it felt like someone had placed a mountain on his shoulders. His knees buckled, and he fell gasping for breath. The crowd of aliens above murmured in amusement. To them, he was nothing but a fragile creature from a weak world. They expected him to collapse within seconds. Zura leaned slightly forward, her expression unreadable. She remembered his nervous laugh, his wide eyes, and the way he tried to apologize. She didn't know why, but part of her wanted him to survive, perhaps to prove the arrogance of her people wrong. Ethan clenched his teeth and pushed himself up. His muscles screamed in protest. His veins felt like fire. The gravity pressed down harder, but he refused to fall again. As he struggled to stand, memories of Delta Force training flooded back: the endless drills in extreme conditions, the techniques for managing pain and exhaustion. He regulated his breathing using the combat breathing technique, 4 seconds in hold for 4, 4 seconds out, hold for 4. The controlled breathing helped him focus through the crushing pressure. Then he noticed something. The gravity pulse came in waves timed with the flicker of lights on the control node across the sphere. The pattern wasn't random, it was systematic, almost like a heartbeat. He'd worked on machines his whole life, fixing plasma conduits, on spacecraft, repairing ship systems in emergency conditions. This was no different. It was just another system with rules and patterns waiting to be understood. Ethan crawled toward the nearest stabilizer panel, his fingers trembling with effort. He pulled a wire from his jumpsuit pocket, a habit from work, always keeping the basics on hand, and jammed it into the glowing interface. Sparks flew. The gravity pulse hesitated. For a second, the crushing pressure lifted. Ethan gasped for air and adjusted the connection, balancing the energy feed. His engineer's mind analyzed the system on the fly, identifying control points and feedback loops. The crowd fell silent as the human began controlling the chamber itself. Emperor Thalrax frowned deeply. "He's adapting," he muttered, surprise evident in his tone. Zora's lips curved ever so slightly. "He's thinking," she whispered, as if discovering something unexpected. The next few minutes turned into a silent battle between man and machine. The field tried to overpower him, increasing pressure when he gained stability. But Ethan used his instincts and timing to stabilize each pulse. He crawled from platform to platform, rewiring energy nodes with determination born from years of combat experience. His movements became more confident as he learned the system's patterns. When a platform tilted dangerously, threatening to send him into the abyss, he used the wire to redirect energy to the stabilizers. When the central gravity orb pulsed with increased power, he adjusted his position to counterbalance the force. When the final pulse came stronger than all previous ones, Ethan pulled a metal plate from the floor and reflected the energy burst back at the gravity orb. The orb stabilized, flickering briefly before settling into a steady rhythm. The chamber went still, and a deep hum of harmony filled the air. The lights dimmed, signaling the end of the trial. Ethan fell to one knee, drenched in sweat, breathing hard but alive. He'd beaten their test using nothing but ingenuity and the skills earned through decades of experience. The audience was stunned. No human had ever passed the gravity sphere test. Many had expected him to die in the first minute. Emperor Thalrax stood, his deep voice echoing with grudging respect. "He endures where others fail. Perhaps there is some worth in this creature." Zora rose slowly, her gaze fixed on Ethan. "Maybe," she said quietly, "or maybe he just doesn't know when to give up." As the guards led Ethan out, one of them slipped a small metal disc into his palm. No one saw the exchange. The guard whispered, "For you," and walked away without further explanation. When Ethan was alone again in his cell, he examined the disc. On its surface glowed faint alien letters that rearranged themselves into English before his eyes. "Meet me in the garden chamber at the third light cycle if you want to live." Ethan frowned, turning the disc over in his hands. "Who could have sent this?" he muttered. His instincts screamed trap, but curiosity burned stronger. He knew one thing: the next trial might be worse. And if someone wanted to help him, he needed to find out why. Outside, Princess Zora walked alone through a glowing hallway lined with glass. Her reflection shimmered like starlight against the polished surfaces. She felt something strange in her chest, a mix of anger and fascination. The human had laughed at her, defied her, and yet survived where proud alien warriors had failed. Her personal aide approached, bowing deeply. "My princess, the Emperor is pleased. The people find the human struggle entertaining." Zora's eyes narrowed. "He's not entertainment," she said coldly. "He's a problem." She paused, watching the stars through a viewport. And problems can either destroy empires or reshape them. In the next cycle, the arena would host the second trial. The crowd would grow, the stakes would rise. But somewhere deep inside the royal ship, under the watchful eyes of cameras and drones, the human prepared for something else. He hid the disc beneath his pillow, knowing that tonight he would sneak out and follow its message. Was it a trap? Was it a chance to escape? Or was it her Princess Zora herself testing him again? The hum of the ship grew louder, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Ethan stared out the small window of his glowing cell. The stars beyond seemed closer than ever, like silent watchers waiting to see what he'd do next. And when the lights dimmed for night cycle, a faint whisper echoed through the vents. Not from a machine, not from a guard, but from a voice he recognized, calm and dangerous. "Don't sleep, human. The real trial begins in the garden. Ethan looked up sharply, his pulse racing. Somewhere behind that voice, the fate of his life, and perhaps the heart of a princess, was already waiting. The lights dimmed across the Klein Royal flagship, shifting from bright silver to a soft indigo hue that meant night in their world. For the first time since his capture, Ethan felt the strange rhythm of the alien ship's day and night cycle. The hum of engines became quieter and the corridors emptied of guards. Somewhere in the distance, he could still hear the faint echo of alien music, soft, haunting, and unfamiliar. He turned the small, glowing disc over in his hands, studying its seamless construction. The message shimmered again: "Meet me in the garden chamber at the third light cycle if you want to live." Ethan didn't know who sent it, Allie or Trap, but he knew one thing for certain: staying still meant certain death. He glanced up at the glowing walls of his cell, searching for any weakness. The surface seemed alive, pulsing faintly, like the skin of some gigantic creature. He reached into his boot and retrieved a small metal shard he'd broken off from one of the gravity sphere's platforms, insurance taken when no one was watching. Using the shard, he carefully scraped the surface of the wall's energy seam where the glowing field was thinnest. Sparks flickered and vanished as he worked. He thought of other barriers he'd bypassed in his life: security systems in Baghdad, enemy lines in Kuwait, the walls he'd built around himself after coming home. Finally, the wall flickered for half a second, just enough. Ethan slipped through the temporary gap, emerging into the corridor outside. The passageway was empty, filled with a faint mist and humming light. Strange runes floated across the floor, marking paths to different decks. Ethan crouched low and moved carefully, remembering the layout from when the guards had dragged him earlier. The path to the garden chamber was deep in the ship's heart, near the oxygen generators. As he walked, he caught glimpses through crystal windows of the endless void outside, stars swirling like dust in a beam of light. It was both beautiful and terrifying. He wondered how far he was from Earth, from the simple life he'd built for himself after leaving the military. It seemed like another lifetime now: the modest apartment in Houston, the engineering firm where he'd worked for 15 years, the quiet evenings spent alone with books about worlds he never thought he'd see. After what felt like an hour of sneaking, avoiding patrol drones and the occasional night guard, he reached a wide arched door made of living vines. The moment he approached, they shifted, curling away to form an entrance. Ethan hesitated, then stepped through. Inside was something he never expected: an alien paradise. The garden chamber was enormous, filled with floating lights and translucent leaves that shimmered like glass. Trees with liquid silver bark reached toward the ceiling, and flowers opened with a soft musical hum when he passed. It was like stepping inside a dream. A thin mist hung in the air, glowing faintly blue. Then he heard footsteps. Instinctively, Ethan hid behind a massive glowing fern, peering through the luminescent leaves. A tall figure entered, silver light reflecting off her long hair. It was Princess Zura, dressed not in her royal armor, but in a simpler gown made of silk-like strands that shimmered with every movement. She looked younger, softer, different from the cold princess he had seen in the arena. Her face, without the formal expressions of court, showed a vulnerability he wouldn't have believed possible. "I know you're there, human," she said calmly without turning. Her voice was softer now, but it still carried authority that seemed bred into her bones. Ethan stepped out slowly, keeping a safe distance. Special ops training had taught him to maintain escape routes, even during negotiations. "You're the one who sent the message." Zura nodded slightly. "Yes, I did." "Why gay?" he asked, his tone cautious, searching her alien features for any sign of deception. She turned her glowing eyes, catching the starlight from the ceiling. "Because if you face the next trial alone, you will die." Ethan frowned. "And you care because—" Zura walked toward a glowing pool at the center of the chamber, kneeling to touch the water. Ripples of light spread under her hand like living creatures. "Because I don't want to marry you, human," she said quietly, "and I don't want your death to make me a prisoner of my father's politics again." Her words made him pause. For the first time, she sounded less like a princess and more like someone trapped in her own world, not unlike the soldiers he'd known following orders while silently questioning them. "My father used the ancient marriage law to chain me," she continued, her voice lower now. "No one dares challenge him. But your laugh, your foolish mistake, it created an excuse." She looked up at him, her alien eyes somehow expressing very human emotions. "He wants to test humanity to see if your kind deserves a place among our empire." Ethan rubbed the back of his neck, processing the implications. "So I'm a test subject." Zura looked up, her expression unreadable in the garden's shifting light. "Or a chance." They stood in silence, the alien flowers swaying gently around them. Finally, Zura said, "The next trial will test your mind. It's called the Maze of Roots, a living structure that senses fear and hesitation. If you panic, it will crush you." Ethan's eyes widened. "And if I don't, then it lets you live," she said, "but no one has ever walked out untouched." He took a step closer, curiosity overcoming caution. "Then why help me?" Zura hesitated, then said softly, "Because you made me laugh too." Ethan blinked, confused. "Wait, what?" She smirked slightly. "When you stumbled over your apology, your voice shaking, I realized for the first time that fear can be honest." Her expression softened momentarily. "My people don't laugh human, not truly. We only mock or command. But your reaction was real." Her eyes softened for a brief second, then turned sharp again. "Don't mistake this for kindness. If you fail, you die. If you survive, my father will find another way to test you. But between those two, maybe we both can find a way out." Before Ethan could reply, a loud metallic echo filled the chamber, the sound of a security drone hovering above. Zura's eyes flashed with alarm. "Go hide behind the pool," she whispered sharply. Ethan dove behind a pillar as a hovering orb entered, scanning the room with a red light. The drone paused on Zura. "Princess, you are not authorized to be here." Zura stood calmly, her posture instantly reverting to royal bearing. "I needed solitude. Will you question royalty?" Her voice carried such command that Ethan felt it in his chest. The drone paused, then floated back toward the exit. The vines closed behind it, sealing the room again. Ethan let out a slow breath emerging from his hiding place. "You risked getting caught just to warn me." Zura turned away, her form glowing faintly in the mist. "Don't flatter yourself, human. If you die, I lose my freedom." Still, there was something in her voice. It didn't match her words, a softness she tried to hide. She began walking toward the exit, her gown flowing like liquid moonlight. Before she left, she looked over her shoulder and said, "At dawn, the trial begins. I can't help you there. But remember this, the maze listens to your heartbeat. Calm it, and you might see the exit." She disappeared into the darkness beyond the vines, leaving Ethan standing alone in the glowing garden. He stared at the shimmering pool, seeing his reflection ripple and distort. 58 years old, gray at the temples, the scar from Basra still visible, a human engineer thrown into an alien power struggle. "Calm my heartbeat," he muttered, shaking his head. Easy for her to say. Suddenly, the ground trembled faintly beneath his feet, as if the ship itself had taken a deep breath. He looked up to see the vines on the ceiling shift slightly, their glowing roots stretching across the walls like veins. It was as if the garden chamber itself had been listening to every word. He backed away, slowly realizing that maybe the trial had already begun. Maybe this garden wasn't just a secret meeting place, it was alive, watching, learning his fear. In the darkness above, a small hidden lens blinked red, transmitting everything to the Emperor's private chamber. Emperor Thalrak sat in silence, watching the human and his daughter on a projection screen. A small, knowing smile spread across his face. "So the princess takes interest in her fool," he murmured, fingers tapping against his crystalline throne. "Good. The next trial will show whether he's truly worthy of the Klein name or just another weak human." Back in the garden, Ethan sat near the glowing pool, exhaustion creeping into his body, but his mind refused to rest. The princess's words echoed in his head. "The maze listens to your heartbeat." He didn't know it yet, but tomorrow's trial wouldn't just test his courage, it would test his soul. And hidden within the living maze, another player was already waiting for him. Prince Vaughn, the one who wanted him dead. As the alien night deepened, the flowers dimmed one by one until only the faint light from the pool remained. And within that reflection, two faint red eyes flickered behind Ethan, watching, waiting, ready for the dawn. The artificial dawn of the Klein flagship rose not with sunlight, but with the low hum of awakening energy coursing through the walls. Corridors brightened from indigo to brilliant white, signaling the start of a new cycle. For Ethan, it wasn't morning, it was the sound of judgment. He hadn't slept since his meeting with Princess Zura. The memory of her warning echoed in his mind. The maze listens to your heartbeat. Calm it, and you might see the exit. He'd spent the hours practicing breathing techniques from his Delta Force days, focusing his mind the way he once had before high-risk operations. When the guards came for him, their faces hidden behind shimmering helmets, Ethan was ready, or as ready as any man could be for alien trials designed to kill him. They marched in perfect synchronization, their armor reflecting light like water. They said nothing as they led him through a long corridor lined with alien symbols that seemed to shift and change as he passed. The air felt heavy, charged with anticipation. He could hear the low murmur of a waiting crowd ahead, larger than yesterday, word having spread about the human who survived the first trial. Then the massive gates opened, revealing the maze of roots. The arena was breathtaking and horrifying in equal measure. Vast walls of living vines stretched toward a ceiling lost in darkness, each tendril pulsing faintly with blue-green light. The ground shimmered like liquid glass mist rising from it in slow hypnotic spirals. The vines moved slightly, as if breathing, adjusting themselves for their new contestant. Alien spectators filled the stands above, their voices a chorus of excitement and bloodlust. At the center balcony, Emperor Thalrak sat like a god, carved from stone, his massive form dwarfing those around him. Beside him, Zura watched with carefully controlled features, her silver eyes reflecting 1,000 emotions she refused to show. On the Emperor's other side stood advisors and court officials, but the space where Prince Vaughn should have been remained conspicuously empty. The Emperor's voice echoed across the chamber. The human faces the second trial. The maze of roots. It listens to fear and feeds on lies. Let him find the heart of the maze, or let him become part of it. The crowd roared. Ethan stepped inside and the gates closed behind him with a deep, resonant rumble. Instantly, the sound vanished, no more cheering, no hum of machinery, just silence. The vines above twisted, sealing away the light until he was surrounded only by the faint blue glow emanating from the living walls. He took a careful step forward, his boots touching the slick floor. Instantly, the walls shifted, closing tighter around him. He froze, realizing the maze was responding to his elevated heartbeat. Every time he breathed too quickly, the vines moved closer, sensing his fear. Ethan whispered under his breath, "Calm down, stay steady." He closed his eyes for a second and slowed his breathing using the same technique that had helped him endure torture resistance training. Breathe in for 4 hold, for 4 out, for 4 hold, for 4. The vines loosened slightly, giving him a narrow path forward. He began walking slowly, following the glowing lines that appeared on the floor. The deeper he went, the darker it grew. The air thickened with a sweet alien scent, something between flowers and ozone. His head started to spin slightly, and he realized the atmosphere itself was affecting him, attempting to disorient his human physiology. Hallucinations flickered at the edge of his vision. He saw flashes of Earth, his old apartment in Houston, colleagues laughing at the engineering firm's Christmas party, the sky over Kennedy Space Center, where he'd once worked as a contractor. But when he reached to touch these visions, they turned to mist. The maze was playing tricks on his mind, testing his emotional responses. Ethan focused on the task, ignoring the illusions. He'd been trained to withstand psychological warfare. This was just another form of it, albeit more alien. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the corridors, not Zura's, not the Emperor's, but deep and mocking. Well, well, the famous human, the one who made the princess blush. Ethan spun around, his pulse spiking despite his attempts at control. From the shadows stepped Prince Vaughn, tall and armored, smiling with cruel amusement. His pale blue skin shimmered under the maze's glow, and his eyes burned with jealousy and hatred. "You," Ethan said, recognizing him from the ceremony. "You're the one she was supposed to marry." Vaughn tilted his head. "Yes, until you laughed. Now my honor is stained because of you, human." He stepped closer, his armor whispering as it moved like thousands of tiny organisms shifting in concert. "But don't worry, I intend to clean that stain myself." Ethan took a step back, assessing the alien prince, the way he'd once evaluated hostile combatants, looking for weaknesses, vulnerabilities, patterns of movement. "If you want me dead, the maze will do it for you." Vaughn's grin widened, revealing teeth that gleamed like polished crystal. "No, the maze obeys me. My family grew this place from our own bloodline. It will listen to my command." He raised a hand, and the vines around them writhed like serpents, snapping toward Ethan with frightening speed. Ethan dove to the side, rolling under a sweeping tendril that crashed into the ground where he'd stood. Sparks of blue light flew from the impact as he scrambled to his feet. As he ran deeper into the maze, Ethan grabbed a fallen branch. It was metallic at the core, pulsing faintly with the same energy as the walls. He jammed it into one of the pursuing roots. The plant recoiled, the lights flickering along its length. "Clever." Vaughn's voice echoed through the living corridors, seeming to come from all directions at once. "But you can't outsmart the blood of Klein." The prince raised both hands, and the maze came alive with renewed fury. Vines shot from every direction, curling around Ethan's legs, his waist, his throat. He gasped for air as they tightened, trying to tear them off. But the more he fought, the tighter they squeezed. As darkness edged his vision, Ethan remembered Zura's words again. Calm your heartbeat. He forced himself to go still, to breathe evenly, despite the constriction around his throat. The vines hesitated, confused by the contradiction between his physical predicament and his controlled vital signs. You don't feed on strength, Ethan whispered, understanding dawning. You feed on fear. He closed his eyes, drawing on decades-old training. He pictured himself back on Earth, fixing machines in the quiet of his workshop, surrounded by the familiar and ordinary. His mind conjured the rhythm of rain on his apartment window, the smell of engine oil, the satisfaction of solving complex mechanical problems. The vines loosened slightly as his heartbeat slowed. Then with sudden force, Ethan grabbed the metal shard he'd kept hidden in his pocket, the same wire from before, and jammed it into the glowing root nearest his throat. Electricity crackled. The vine shrieked an organic sound that shouldn't come from a plant and recoiled in pain. The entire network shuddered momentarily, releasing him. Ethan broke free, gasping for air, and began running deeper into the maze. Vaughn roared behind him, his voice distorting with fury. You think you can run from me, human? But Ethan didn't answer. He was observing, analyzing. Each time his heart rate increased from exertion, the vines moved closer. Each time he controlled it, they retreated. He followed the pulse of light beneath his feet, recognizing a pattern similar to the gravity sphere's energy nodes. Every pulse meant a turn, every dim flicker warned of a dead end. Behind him, Vaughn pursued, commanding the maze to trap the human. But something strange was happening. The maze seemed confused, responding to both Vaughn's commands and Ethan's emotional control. Minutes passed, maybe hours, time losing meaning in the green-blue labyrinth, until Ethan stumbled into a clearing. At the center was a glowing crystal heart suspended between two massive vines, pulsing with the rhythm of the entire maze. He realized this was the core of the maze, the destination he was meant to reach. He stepped closer, but then froze as he spotted a figure on the other side. Vaughn stood there, blood trickling from his lip, where a vine had struck him, his eyes burning with rage. You reached the heart, he said, his voice strained with disbelief, but you'll never leave it alive. The prince drew a blade made of living light, its edge humming with deadly intent. Ethan looked around desperately, nothing but Vine's roots and the glowing core pulsing like a heartbeat. Then an idea struck him, dangerous and desperate, but the only option left. He shouted, You said the maze listens to your blood, right? Vaughn frowned. Yes, why? Ethan grabbed one of the broken metal shards from the floor and without hesitation sliced his own palm open. Blood. Human blood spilled onto the nearest root. The maze pulsed violently, confused by this new input. No. Vaughn's eyes widened in horror. Human blood is corrupt. It will poison the maze. But the living labyrinth didn't reject it. It began absorbing Ethan's blood, glowing brighter with each drop. The vines trembled violently, breaking free from the walls. The entire arena shook as the roots turned against their master, wrapping around Vaughn. The prince screamed, trying to command them, invoking ancient privileges and bloodlines. But the maze no longer obeyed. It was confused, torn between two bloodlines, two masters with different rhythms. Ethan stumbled backward as the floor cracked open, light spilling out from beneath. The vines dragged Vaughn into the roots, his scream fading into silence as he disappeared into the living walls. Then everything went still. A moment later, ceiling vines opened, and a beam of light descended from above. The Emperor's voice boomed across the chamber. The humans survived the maze. The audience above roared in disbelief. Zura stood frozen, her eyes wide with both shock and what might have been relief. Ethan collapsed to his knees, breathing hard, covered in dirt and glowing sap. The maze around him pulsed once like a heartbeat, acknowledging his victory, and sank into stillness. Guards rushed in to retrieve him, but the Emperor raised a hand. No, let him walk out himself. Zura stepped forward, watching as Ethan stumbled out of the maze on his own power. When he passed her, she whispered, You killed Vaughn. Ethan shook his head weakly. The maze did. Zura's voice trembled slightly. You don't understand, human. You didn't just survive the trial, you changed it forever. The maze has never tasted human blood before. High above them, Emperor Thalrax leaned back in his throne, his glowing eyes narrowing thoughtfully. He bleeds courage and chaos, he muttered. Perhaps humanity deserves its chance after all. That night, as Ethan's wounds were tended in silence by medical drones, A messenger slipped a sealed note under his chamber door. It bore the royal crest in a single line of alien script that translated to, "The next trial will break your heart, human, and mine." When Ethan woke, the room around him pulsed softly with blue light. He was lying on a levitating bed surrounded by floating machines that hummed as they healed the cuts along his arms and face. His right hand, where he'd sliced it open, was wrapped in a translucent bandage that glowed softly. He stared up at the ceiling where alien runes glowed faintly, shifting between languages he didn't understand. His mind was foggy, the memory of the maze still clawing at the back of his thoughts. The vines, the screams, Vaughn's final cry as he was dragged into the living walls. Everything blurred together like a half-remembered nightmare. But one thing stood clear in his mind, Zura's voice. "You didn't just survive the trial, you changed it forever." He sat up slowly, the pain sharp but manageable. The air in his chamber felt different, heavier, colder. The guards who used to watch him with mocking grins now kept their distance, their expressions unreadable behind their glassy helmets. The human had done the impossible, and now even the Klein elite didn't know what to make of him. Then the door slid open and she entered, Princess Zura wearing her royal armor, again gleaming like liquid silver. Her face was calm, but her eyes held too many thoughts to hide. She stopped at the foot of his bed. "You survived," she said softly. "My father is impressed." Ethan looked at her wearily. "That's not the same as being safe." She tilted her head slightly. "No, it isn't." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Zura took a deep breath. "Your next trial is not about strength or skill," she said. "It's about the heart." "The heart," Ethan frowned. "You mean what feelings?" Zura's gaze lowered. "Mercy." She handed him a small metallic token etched with glowing blue symbols, a royal pass that would grant him limited movement within certain areas of the ship. "Tomorrow," she continued, "you will be taken to the lower arena. You will face a creature called Varak, one of our sacred beasts. My father raised it since it was an egg. It is intelligent, ancient, and dangerous." Ethan turned the token in his hand. "Let me guess. I have to fight it." Zura hesitated, something vulnerable flickering across her features. "No, you have to choose whether to fight it or free it." Ethan blinked. "What kind of trial is that?" Zura looked away, unable to meet his eyes. "A cruel one. The Varric is kept in pain to keep it obedient. If you release it, it may destroy everything around it, including you. And if I kill it, then you live." She finally looked at him directly. "But you prove that humanity is just like us." Ethan's chest tightened. He could see it in her eyes. This wasn't just a test for him. It was for her too, perhaps for the entire Klein Empire. Before she turned to leave, she said something that caught him off guard. "My father thinks mercy is weakness," she whispered. "Show him it isn't." The next cycle came too soon. Ethan stood in the arena once again, but this time the atmosphere was different. The stands were full to capacity. Thousands of aliens from across the Empire had come to see the humans' next act of defiance. The Emperor sat high above, unmoving, his expression like carved stone. Princess Zura sat beside him, her posture rigid. The empty seat where Vaughn would have been seemed to accuse everyone with its emptiness. When the massive gate opened, a thunderous roar shook the chamber. Out of the darkness emerged the Varric. It was enormous, at least 10 meters tall, covered in metallic scales that shimmered like molten glass. 4 eyes glowed with intelligence, and heavy chains bound its legs and neck. Every movement it made caused the air to tremble. Sparks of energy snapped from its restraints. Ethan felt his throat go dry. The creature looked at him not with hatred, but with exhaustion. Its breathing was heavy, its eyes filled with something almost human pain. The Emperor's voice echoed through the arena. "Human, this is your trial. The beast before you was once the guardian of my world. Now it is broken. If you destroy it, you will earn the title of warrior. If you free it, you will die." The crowd cheered, bloodlust evident in their alien calls. The chains around the Varric glowed brighter, sending visible waves of pain through its massive body. It roared again, but the sound was more despair than rage. Ethan stood frozen. His hands shook as he stared at the creature. He remembered Zura's words, "Show him mercy isn't weakness." Ethan's voice cracked as he shouted up at the stands, "You call this a test? This thing doesn't need punishment. It needs freedom." The crowd murmured in shock at his audacity. The Emperor narrowed his eyes. "Then prove your conviction human," he said coldly. "The choice is yours." Ethan stepped forward, his heart pounding so loud he could barely hear his thoughts. He approached the Varric slowly, the creature's 4 eyes following his every move. Its claws flexed, chains rattling ominously. He placed his hand on one of the glowing restraints. The energy burned his skin, but he didn't pull back. He had seen enough suffering in war to recognize it in any form, human or alien. He spoke softly, "You're not my enemy, are you?" The creature blinked, slowly lowering its massive head just slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement. Zura watched from above, her hands tightening on the edge of her seat. "Don't do it," her aide whispered beside her. "He'll die if he releases it." But she didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on the human below, seeing something in him that her people had long forgotten. Ethan pulled a small tool from his pocket, the same device he'd made from scraps during his first trial. With practiced precision, he jammed it into the chain's energy node. Sparks flew. The energy flickered. The crowd gasped. The Emperor rose. "Enough," he thundered. "Humans, stop this madness." But Ethan shouted back, "No madness is keeping something alive just to make it suffer." The final restraint snapped, and the Varric let out a roar that shook the foundations of the ship. Its wings, previously bound tight against its body, burst open, scattering shards of glowing dust across the arena. The crowd screamed as the creature rose to its full height, towering over them all. The Emperor drew his staff, energy flaring at its tip. "Kill him," he ordered the guards. But before they could move, the Varric turned toward the Emperor's balcony. Its massive head lowered and its voice thundered, not words but something deeper. A sound that carried emotion and thought through the air like a physical force. Zura froze as the voice echoed inside her mind. "The human freed me, not for glory but for mercy. I will not harm those who showed compassion." The creature spread its wings, breaking through the arena's dome, leaving behind a trail of light as it soared into space. The crowd fell silent, witnessing something unprecedented in their history, a Varric freed and forgiving. The Emperor lowered his staff slowly. Then in a voice that shook with restrained emotion, he said, "He disobeyed my command. He defied the will of the Empire." And yet he paused, his gaze shifting toward Zura, then back to Ethan. "The creature spared us all." Zura stood unable to hide the emotion in her eyes. Ethan looked up at her, exhausted, bleeding from the energy burns on his hands, but still standing. For a moment their eyes met, and the noise of the crowd faded. The lights dimmed, and everything else vanished. Zura descended from the balcony, walking across the arena floor. Her armor shimmered as she approached him. "You could have killed it," she said softly. Ethan nodded. "But then I'd be no better than the ones who chained it." She looked at him for a long time, then whispered, "You don't laugh at pain. You fight it." The Emperor rose once more. "Enough sentiment. The next trial begins soon," he said sharply, though his tone held less rage than before. Guards stepped forward to escort Ethan away. But as he passed Zura, she leaned closer, her voice barely audible. "You're changing my father human, and that terrifies him." Ethan gave a weak smile. Good, maybe fear is what he needs. Later, as he rested in his chamber, the faint hum of the ship felt different, almost calm. For the first time, the guards outside whispered softly as if afraid of waking something ancient. And in the royal chamber, Emperor Thalrax stared out at the stars, lost in thought. His aide approached carefully. "My lord, the people, they cheer for him." The Emperor's voice rumbled low. "They cheer for a fool who showed mercy." He turned, his massive form silhouetted against the stars. "Perhaps that is what frightens me most." Far away in the cold silence of space, the Varric's roar echoed across the void, a sound of freedom. And in its reflection, Zura stared from her window, whispering to herself, "He has no crown, no empire, and yet he makes the stars bow to him." The silence in the ship after the trial of heart felt heavier than any noise. The crowd had dispersed. The beast was gone, and the echo of Ethan's defiance still rippled through the Empire like an aftershock. Rumors spread across every deck. The human had freed a sacred creature and lived. Some called him blessed, others called him cursed, but everyone called him dangerous. Ethan didn't feel like a hero. He sat on the edge of his narrow bed, wrapping a cloth around his burned hand. Each movement reminded him of what he'd risked. His muscles ached. His lungs still burned from the Varric's roar, but his mind refused to rest. He had seen something shift in Emperor Thalrax's eyes when the creature flew free, a flicker of doubt, perhaps even respect. But that was the kind of thought that could get him killed. The doors hissed open and two guards entered silently. "The Emperor summons you," one said, voice neutral, where once there had been contempt. Ethan followed, expecting another trial chamber, but instead they led him through a narrow passageway lined with glowing runes. At the end stood a vast hall made of black stone and liquid glass torches burning with violet fire. The Emperor sat alone on a throne of living metal, his eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. "You have completed 3 trials," Thalrax said. and turned each one into something it was never meant to be. You make fools of my traditions human, yet I cannot ignore your courage. Ethan stood quietly, unsure if it was an insult or a compliment. The Emperor was a creature of contradictions, a being who valued strength, yet seemed disturbed when faced with a different kind of power. You have one last chance to prove what you truly are. The Emperor continued, rising from his throne. His height cast a shadow that stretched across the floor, engulfing Ethan in darkness. Tomorrow you face the final trial, the trial of dominion. Ethan frowned. What's that supposed to mean? The Emperor's lips curved into a faint smile that never reached his eyes. It means you will fight for your place beside my daughter, or die as entertainment for my people. Ethan's stomach sank. A duel, not just a duel, Thalrak said, his voice cold and echoing. A battle to the death against a warrior of my choosing, one who fights not for love, but for revenge. Ethan's blood ran cold. He didn't need to ask who that warrior would be. The maze had devoured Prince Vaughn, but no one had seen the body. In his gut, Ethan knew the prince wasn't gone. Nothing in this empire was ever quite what it seemed. When he was taken back to his cell, Zura was waiting. She looked different, her armor gone, replaced by a long robe of starlight fabric. Her face was pale and troubled, her silver hair unbound for the first time since he'd met her. You're not supposed to be here, Ethan whispered. I don't care, she said sharply, then lowered her voice. My father intends to make you fight Vaughn. Ethan froze. That's impossible. Vaughn's dead. Zura shook her head, her eyes haunted. Not anymore. The maze didn't kill him, it changed him. Her words chilled him to the core. She explained what her father had done, how Vaughn's remains had been taken to the Bioforge, a chamber deep within the ship, where ancient alien technology fused flesh with crystal and energy, creating something beyond life, beyond death. The Emperor had turned his future son-in-law into a weapon, a perfect instrument of revenge. Tomorrow you'll face him, Zura said, her voice trembling. And if you win, my father will no longer have an excuse to keep you prisoner. But if you lose, she trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, then smiled weakly. You know, for someone who wanted me dead when we met, you're awfully concerned now. Zura glared, but her eyes softened. Don't mistake this for weakness, human. You've done something no one else ever has. She paused, looking vulnerable for the first time. You made me hope. She turned to leave, but Ethan caught her wrist gently. Zura, he said, his voice low, if I don't make it, promise me one thing. She turned slightly, the starlight from the viewport casting half her face in shadow. What? Don't let him turn mercy into a crime. Her throat tightened, and for a brief second her hand squeezed his before she pulled away and vanished into the hall. That night, Ethan didn't sleep. He sat in the corner, tinkering with the remnants of the tools he had scavenged over the trials, crafting a small device, a magnetic pulse generator. Crude but effective. His plan was simple: survive long enough to prove that humans could fight smarter, not harder. Outside his cell, the ship hummed with anticipation. Tomorrow would bring the final trial, the moment when the human either died or forever changed the Klein Empire. And somewhere in the depths of the ship, in a chamber bathed in blue fire, Prince Vaughn's new form stirred, hungering for revenge. When the artificial dawn arrived, the galactic arena of Klein trembled with anticipation. The massive structure, once a place of ceremony and tradition, had become an arena of transformation. News of the human who freed the Varric had spread across the empire like wildfire. Some called it heresy, others whispered of revolution. The stands filled beyond capacity, aliens of every rank and station pressed together to witness the final trial. The arena floor had been transformed overnight. Where once stood platforms and mazes, now there was only a vast circular battleground lined with energy barriers. The floor itself glowed with ancient runes, symbols of combat and dominion that predated the Klein Empire itself. High above, Emperor Thalrax watched the preparations with calculating eyes. His massive frame seemed heavier today, the luminescent patterns on his skin pulsing with unusual intensity. The weight of tradition warred with something new in his gaze doubt. The empire was dividing before him. Court officials whispered of unrest in the outer colonies. Reports came of Klein civilians releasing captive creatures in imitation of the human's act. Even here, in the heart of his power, the crowd below had split into factions, half cheering for tradition, half for change. The human has sown discord throughout our realm, growled an advisor. He must be eliminated to restore order. The emperor did not respond, his attention fixed on his daughter. Princess Zura stood at the viewing portal, her silver eyes reflecting the stars. She had not spoken since dawn. Daughter, he finally said, Are you prepared for what comes next? She turned slowly. Are you, Father? Their gazes, locked in silent combat, a battle fought in glances rather than blows. The Emperor saw something in her eyes he had never witnessed before: defiance. Not the petulant resistance of youth, but the steady resolve of a leader. Below, the doors to the holding cells opened. Ethan Cole emerged, escorted by 4 guards. The crowd's reaction was immediate, a thunder of voices rising in both support and condemnation. He walked steadily, his face composed. At 58, he carried himself with the dignity of a man who had faced death before and found it wanting. The burns on his hands were still visible, badges of his choice to free rather than kill. In his pocket rested the magnetic pulse generator he had crafted through the night, his only weapon against what was to come. As Ethan reached the center of the arena, the Emperor's voice boomed across the chamber. The final trial begins, the trial of dominion. The opposite doors opened and a hush fell over the arena. From the shadows emerged something that had once been Prince Vaughn. His body was fused with crystalline armor, his veins glowing like molten fire beneath translucent skin. His eyes, once blue like all Klein, now burned red with hatred and technological enhancement. His voice, when it came, was layered, half organic, half machine. You took everything from me, human, he snarled, the words distorting with rage. Now I take your life. Ethan's training kicked in immediately. Assess the threat, identify weaknesses, formulate strategy. Vaughn moved with unnatural speed, his body augmented beyond normal Klein capabilities. His right arm had been transformed into a weapon, a blade of pure energy extending from where his hand should have been. I didn't choose this fight, Ethan called out, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. But I'll finish it. The duel began with a burst of energy as Vaughn lunged forward. His blade was a streak of light barely visible as it sliced through the air. Ethan barely dodged, feeling the heat as the weapon scraped against the ground beside him. Sparks flew where energy met matter. The crowd roared as Ethan rolled away, using the momentum to create distance. His mind worked rapidly. Vaughn was faster, stronger, augmented beyond human capability. A direct confrontation would be suicide. Ethan activated the magnetic pulse device, disrupting Vaughn's movement for a split second. The prince's augmented systems faltered momentarily, his stride breaking rhythm. It was enough time for Ethan to circle behind him, analyzing the construction of Vaughn's new form. There, at the junction between organic spine and mechanical enhancement, a power node glowed brighter than the surrounding tissue. Vaughn recovered quickly, slamming Ethan with a surge of kinetic force that threw him across the arena. Pain shot through Ethan's ribs as he collided with the energy barrier. He gasped for breath, forcing himself upright despite the agony. The crowd roared, half cheering for Vaughn, half shouting for the human who had defied their empire. Zura stood unable to remain seated, her heart pounding as she watched Ethan stumble. Every instinct told her to look away, but she couldn't. She had started this journey when she whispered to him in the garden. She would see it through. Your earth-fighting skills are useless here, Vaughn taunted, advancing with predatory confidence. You are nothing but an aging mammal facing extinction. Ethan's mind flashed back to another battlefield, the Kuwait desert, pinned down by enemy fire, outnumbered and outgunned. His Delta Force commander's voice echoed in his memory. When outmatched, changed the battlefield. Ethan circled the arena, drawing Vaughn into pursuit. Each time the prince closed in, Ethan triggered the pulse generator, causing momentary disruption in Vaughn's systems. It wasn't enough to stop him, but it frustrated the prince, making his attacks increasingly reckless. Stop running, coward! Vaughn roared, his mechanical voice distorting with rage. It's called strategy, Ethan replied, his breathing controlled despite the exertion. Something they forgot to program into you. Vaughn's fury mounted with each failed attack. His movements became less precise, more powered by rage than calculation. Exactly what Ethan had been waiting for. When Vaughn charged again, Ethan stood his ground. At the last possible second, he ducked under the energy blade and jammed the magnetic pulse generator directly against the power node on Vaughn's spine. The prince tried to strike, but Ethan twisted, pulling away one of the energy cables on Vaughn's chest. Energy exploded in all directions, knocking them both to the ground. Vaughn screamed, his body crackling with unstable power, his armor beginning to melt from the inside. You think you've won, Vaughn gasped, his voice breaking into mechanical shrieks. You'll never belong here. You'll always be the outsider, the human joke. Ethan stumbled backward, panting, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. Maybe not, he said, but at least I chose who I am. You let them turn you into a weapon. With one last spark, Vaughn collapsed, the light in his eyes fading to darkness. The arena went silent. Every alien stood frozen, unsure what to feel: triumph, horror, or the uncomfortable stirrings of change. Then Emperor Thalrax rose slowly, his massive frame silhouetted against the stars, visible through the arena's transparent ceiling, his gaze heavy, unreadable. "The human wins," he said, finally, his voice echoing through the chamber. The crowd erupted into sound, not cheers, not hatred, but something in between. An awakening. Ethan fell to his knees, exhausted, blood staining the sand beneath him. Guards approached, but the Emperor waved them off with a massive hand. Zura ran down from the balcony, her ceremonial robe flowing like silver flame. She knelt beside Ethan, placing her hand on his shoulder. "You did it," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You survived." Ethan managed a weak grin. "Barely." Zura smiled faintly. "That's still survival." Above them, Emperor Thalrax stared for a long time. His hand tightened around his staff, torn between pride and fear. In the corner of the arena, unseen by all, a small drone blinked red and transmitted everything to the Galactic Council. The message was short but clear. The human passed the final trial, the Emperor hesitates. And somewhere deep inside the Empire's core systems, ancient protocols began to awaken. The law of bloodlines was about to face something it had never known before: change. As the crowd chanted below, Zura looked at Ethan and whispered, "My father won't let this end peacefully." Ethan looked up, his voice quiet but certain. "Then it's time someone rewrote the law." The arena floor was still soaked in energy and silence. The echoes of the final battle faded into the metallic walls of the Klein flagship. Ethan knelt there, his breath heavy, his entire body trembling from exhaustion. His wounds burned like fire, his thoughts scattered like stars. He had done the unthinkable. He had defeated Vaughn, the Emperor's chosen heir. Before the eyes of an empire that believed humans were nothing but soft creatures of chaos and emotion, he had proven them wrong. The crowd didn't know whether to cheer or stay silent. The ancient laws had never accounted for something like this. A human was never meant to win, never meant to stand beside royalty, never meant to change their story. Up on the royal dais, Emperor Thalrax stood without a word, his towering form still as stone. The blue glow in his eyes flickered as though he was thinking of something deep, old, and painful. Zura stood beside him, her chest rising and falling as she tried to breathe through the storm building inside her. Her father finally spoke, his voice shaking the very air. "Enough." The word carried through the ship like a wave. "The trials are complete." The guards lowered their weapons. The audience fell silent, and every alien eye turned to their ruler. Ethan forced himself to stand, his legs weak, but his gaze steady. "So," he said between breaths, "did I pass, or do you want to invent another test?" The Emperor's lips twitched, not a smile, not yet, but something close. "You have a tongue too sharp for a fool human." Ethan shrugged. "Comes with surviving your games." A murmur rippled through the crowd at his boldness. But Thalrax only watched him quietly, then descended from the throne. His massive boots sent tremors through the floor with each step. He stopped only a few paces away from Ethan. The air between them felt like the center of a storm. "Do you understand what you've done?" Thalrax asked, his voice lower now. "You mocked our customs. You broke our beasts' chains. You rewrote the trials that have stood for centuries. You defeated a prince to fight an emperor and turned my daughter against her throne." He leaned forward slightly, his glowing eyes burning through the haze. "And yet you live." Ethan met his gaze without flinching. "Maybe your customs needed breaking," he said quietly. "Maybe the galaxy needs something different than fear." The words hung in the air, and Zura felt her pulse race. Her father's silence was more terrifying than any shout. Every court member held their breath, waiting for the Emperor's verdict. Thalrax turned away from Ethan and faced the crowd. His voice boomed again. "By our ancient laws, the one who survives all 7 trials may claim the right of union with royal blood." The aliens gasped. Zura's eyes widened. Her father paused, then continued. "But I am Emperor, and my word is greater than law." He turned back towards them, his face unreadable. "Human," he said, "you have proven yourself stronger than I believed possible. Yet strength is not the only measure of worth." His eyes narrowed. "Tell me, Ethan of Earth, what do you desire?" The question stunned everyone, including Zura. No one asked a prisoner what they wanted. Ethan hesitated, then straightened. "I want freedom," he said, "not just for me, but for you, your daughter, your people." His voice grew stronger with each word. "You've built an empire that fears compassion. I want you to see that it isn't weakness." He took a step closer, ignoring the guard's startled reaction. Your empire needs to learn how to laugh again, without punishment, without law. For the first time in living memory, the Emperor was silent for too long, his gaze shifting between Ethan and his daughter. His hands tightened on the staff that had ruled galaxies for decades. Then Zura stepped forward, her voice trembling but clear. Father, let him speak, please. Her tone softened. You taught me to value strength, but strength is meaningless when it's built on chains. You saw what mercy did. It saved us all. The Varric spared your throne because of him. The Emperor looked at her sharply, his expression flickering between anger and realization. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Finally, he let out a slow, heavy breath. Perhaps, he murmured, the fool has taught me something. He turned to the crowd and raised his hand. Let it be known across the stars the human Ethan Cole has passed the trials of Klein. Not through conquest, but through heart. The hall erupted in noise shock, in disbelief turning into thunderous applause. The law had never witnessed a moment like this. A human had earned a royal title not through violence, but through defiance of fear itself. Zura turned toward Ethan, her voice low and uncertain. You've done it, she said. He'll never admit it aloud. But you've changed him. Ethan smiled weakly. Good, I was running out of luck anyway. But just as the crowd celebrated, a sudden alarm blared through the ship. The blue lights turned crimson. Holograms flared to life in the air, showing the image of a massive warship emerging from hyperspace. Its design wasn't Klein, it was something older, darker. One of the royal officers rushed forward, his voice panicked. My lord, it's the Council of Intradraw. They've declared the Emperor unfit for rule. Your decision to spare the human has been called an act of treason. The Emperor's face hardened. They move faster than I expected. He looked at Zura, then at Ethan. They will come for both of you. Zura's voice shook. What will you do? Thalrak straightened, his expression fierce once again. I will do what I should have done long ago. Stand beside what is right, not what is old. He looked at Ethan and said quietly, Take her, human. Protect my daughter. You have shown me what courage truly is. Now prove it again. Before Ethan could speak, the Emperor slammed his staff into the ground, and a surge of light filled the hall. Shields activated around the arena, sealing off the exits as ships outside began to fire. The station shuddered under the impact of energy weapons. Zura's hand grabbed Ethan's. We have to go, she urged, pulling him toward a hidden exit behind the throne. He nodded, and together they ran through the corridor as explosions rocked the ship. The lights flickered and debris rained down from above. Behind them, the Emperor's roar echoed through the halls, one final command, one final defiance against his enemies. They reached the hangar bay where escape ships lined the walls. Zura slammed her palm against a control pad, and a small vessel opened its hatch. She turned to Ethan, her voice breaking. He's staying behind to fight. Ethan shook his head. He'll die. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. He knows. As they launched into space, the Klein flagship burned behind them, surrounded by a fleet of crimson warships. The Emperor's voice came through the comms one last time, faint but powerful. Go, daughter of mine. Carry the fire that laughter lit. Make the galaxy remember. Then the transmission cut. The explosion was silent in the vacuum of space, but its light stretched across the stars, a dying sun reborn in defiance. Ethan stared at the growing glow, his chest tight with emotions he couldn't name. Zura sat beside him, silent tears on her cheeks. He whispered softly, he chose to change, even at the end. She looked at him, her eyes fierce through the pain. And now we have to live like his choice mattered. They drifted toward the edge of the starfields, their small ship swallowed by the dark horizon. Behind them, the Empire trembled. Ahead of them, freedom, uncertainty, and a future no one could predict. Zura turned to him, her voice soft. You laughed once, human, she said. That laugh changed my life. Her hand found his across the void between their seats. It changed everything. Ethan smiled faintly. Guess laughter isn't such a crime after all. She reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining. The stars outside shimmered like witnesses to a new beginning. The ship's engines hummed steady and alive, and as they disappeared into the nebula, her whisper carried through the silence of space. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy laughs again. But the story wasn't over. As their small craft vanished into the cosmic mist, a signal pulsed from deep space, a message from the freed Varric. It had found others of its kind living in secret on the fringes of known space. There were more like it creatures and beings who had fled Klein tyranny, forming colonies beyond the Empire's reach. Their ship's navigation system picked up the signal. A set of coordinates appeared on the screen, an invitation, a promise of sanctuary. Ethan studied the star map, calculating their trajectory. "There's a planet in the Magellan cluster," he said, "3 weeks at our current speed." Zura's silver eyes widened. "The forbidden zone, no Klein has ever ventured there." "Then you'll be the first," Ethan replied, "and maybe not the last." As they set course for this new destination, Ethan realized his role had changed. No longer was he just an engineer fixing machines. Now he was a bridge between worlds, a translator of cultures, a mentor to those seeking a different path. In the weeks that followed, as their ship traversed the stars, Zura learned to laugh, truly laugh without fear or restraint. And Ethan shared stories of Earth, of human resilience and compassion, of mistakes made and lessons learned. When they finally reached out to the coordinates, they found not just a planet, but a coalition, a gathering of species from across the galaxy, all seeking refuge from oppression. The Varrock greeted them at the landing pad, its massive wings creating a canopy of living light. "The human who understands mercy," it rumbled, its voice warm with recognition, "and the princess who chose freedom. You are the first of many." As they stepped onto this new world, Ethan felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. At 58, he had begun yet another chapter of his life, perhaps the most important one. Here, his experience would matter more than his strength, his wisdom more than his weapons. He would become what the Klein Empire never expected: a mentor, a teacher showing a new generation that mercy wasn't weakness, that laughter wasn't crime, that change wasn't treason. And somewhere in the vastness of space, the embers of the Klein flagship still burned, a monument to an emperor who in his final moments chose to stand beside what was right, not what was old. His sacrifice would not be forgotten. His daughter would ensure it. The revolution had begun with a laugh. It would continue with a promise. And the stars themselves seemed to whisper as Ethan and Zura walked side by side into their uncertain future. This is how galaxies change, not with conquest, but with heart. After 3 weeks of careful navigation through the stars, their small craft finally approached the coordinates sent by the Varrock. As they descended through wispy clouds of amber and gold, a landscape of breathtaking beauty unfolded below them. The Magellan outpost wasn't just a refugee camp, it was a thriving civilization hidden in plain sight. The settlement sprawled across rolling valleys nestled between jagged mountains that gleamed with deposits of crystal similar to those in Klein architecture. But unlike the cold precision of the Empire, these structures blended harmoniously with the natural landscape. Buildings spiraled upward, following the contours of the terrain, their surfaces changing color with the movements of the twin suns overhead. "It's beautiful," Zura whispered, as their ship touched down on a landing pad constructed from a material that resembled living wood. "How could this have existed without the Empire's knowledge?" The Varrock awaited them, its massive form silhouetted against the sunset. Behind it stood a delegation unlike anything Ethan had ever seen, beings from at least a dozen different species, some he recognized from Earth's limited contact with the galaxy, others entirely new to him. "The Empire sees only what it wishes to see," the Varrock rumbled, its telepathic voice resonating in their minds. "And we have become very good at remaining invisible." As they disembarked, Ethan noticed 3 specific features of this remarkable community that spoke to its unique character. First, the governance structure. Unlike the rigid hierarchy of the Klein, the Magellan outpost operated through a council of elders drawn from each species. Decisions were made through consensus rather than decree. At their first community gathering, Ethan watched as representatives debated resources and defense with equal voice, regardless of physical size or technological advancement. Second, the integration of technology and nature that surpassed anything on Earth or in the Klein Empire. Energy systems drew power directly from the planet's magnetic field without disrupting it. Food was cultivated in spiral gardens that produced 10 times the yield of traditional farming while actually enriching the soil. Medicine combined advanced biotech with natural remedies, allowing for treatments tailored to each species' unique biology. Third and most striking to Ethan was the education system. The community had constructed a circular amphitheater where knowledge was freely shared. Children of all species learned together, their differences celebrated rather than homogenized. He watched a Klein child, one of the few refugees from the Empire, working alongside a reptilian species that would have been considered inferior back home. "They need guides more than rulers," explained Varrock as they toured the settlement. teachers more than warriors. 2 months after their arrival, as Ethan and Zura had begun to establish their place in this new society, an unmarked ship arrived bearing news from the Klein Empire. The message was delivered by a young Klein officer who had once served in Thalrax's court. "The Empire is in turmoil," he reported, his hands trembling as he displayed a holographic record. After the Emperor's sacrifice, a civil conflict erupted between the traditionalists, who want to maintain the old ways, and the reformists, who were inspired by your actions. The hologram showed massive demonstrations in Klein cities with crowds holding symbols of the Varak, now an emblem of freedom. In some regions, Klein had already abandoned the forced servitude of other species. In others, brutal crackdowns attempted to preserve the old order. "The Council of Intradraw claimed the throne," the messenger continued. "But many refuse to recognize their authority. They blame you both for the chaos, but others—" He hesitated. "Others speak your names like a prayer for change." Most surprisingly, a movement had formed, calling themselves the Emperor's Last Command. Klein, who believed Thalrax's final act had been his most important. They distributed recordings of the arena events throughout the Empire despite intra-draw attempts to suppress them. "Princess Zura," the messenger bowed deeply, "many await your return, believing you are the rightful heir to a new Klein society." Zura's face showed the weight of this unexpected responsibility. "I cannot return to rule as my father did," she said finally, "but perhaps I can help build something new." In the year that followed, Ethan found his purpose in this community of outcasts and visionaries. Drawing on his military experience, he established a defensive strategy that emphasized protection without aggression. Teams were formed not based on species, but on complementary abilities. The swift working alongside the strong, the technological minds partnered with instinctive strategists. More importantly, he became a teacher in the amphitheater. 3 times each week, he shared knowledge from Earth that the galaxy had never known. Some lessons were practical engineering techniques that combined Klein crystalline technology with Earth's innovative problem-solving. He taught methods for repairing systems with limited resources, skills he'd mastered during his deployments. Other lessons went deeper. He shared Earth's long, painful history of overcoming prejudice and division. He spoke of humanity's mistakes and hard-won wisdom. The concept of democracy fascinated species that had only known rule by strength or birthright. "On Earth, we learned often too slowly that diversity isn't weakness," he explained to a class of 30 beings from 7 different species. "It's the ultimate form of resilience. A monoculture can be destroyed by a single disease, but a diverse ecosystem adapts and survives." The former Delta Force operator also taught conflict resolution without violence techniques he'd learned after returning from war. "The strongest warrior isn't the one who defeats every enemy," he told them, "but the one who turns enemies into allies." At 60, Ethan found himself respected not for his combat skills, but for his wisdom, exactly the transformation that the narrative patterns of his generation valued most. The young Klein who had fled the Empire sought him out for counsel. The Varak brought their disputes to him for mediation. Zura, meanwhile, became a bridge between worlds. Using secure channels established by sympathizers, she communicated with reform movements growing throughout the Klein Empire. She never called herself queen or princess anymore. Those titles belonged to the old world. Instead, she became known as the voice of the nebula, advocating for a galactic society built on cooperation rather than domination. 6 months after the messenger's arrival, she and Ethan stood on a hilltop overlooking the expanding settlement. New refugees arrived weekly now, bringing stories of changes spreading throughout known space. "My father would never recognize what his empire is becoming," she said softly. "I think he saw it coming," Ethan replied. "That's why he made the choice he did." She turned to him, silver eyes catching the light of stars just beginning to appear. "When you laughed in that arena, did you ever imagine it would lead to this?" Ethan shook his head, the lines around his eyes deepening with his smile. "I was just trying not to get killed. And instead you helped birth a revolution." He took her hand, a gesture that once would have been unthinkable between a Klein royal and a human engineer. "Not me. Us." As night fell completely, the settlement below glowed with lights of a dozen different colors and technologies, each representing a different heritage brought to this haven. Earth was just one small point of light in that constellation of cultures, but an important one. In a ceremony held on the anniversary of their arrival, The Council of Elders formally recognized Ethan and Zura's contributions. The Varric, now leading a growing community of its own kind, presented them with a crystalline structure that captured and held their integrated DNA patterns, the ultimate symbol in their culture of partnership and legacy. What began with laughter continues with wisdom, the Varric announced to the gathered community. The human who taught mercy and the princess who chose freedom have shown us that true strength lies not in domination, but in harmony. Later that night in their quarters, fashioned from local wood and salvaged spacecraft parts, Ethan received a final message from an old contact in Earth's space program. It was brief but momentous. The Klein Reform Council has requested diplomatic relations with Earth. They've asked specifically for you as ambassador. Zura read the message over his shoulder. Will you go back? Ethan considered the question carefully, thinking of the journey that had brought him here from a lonely apartment in Houston to the center of galactic change. At 60, most men were considering retirement. But he had found something better than rest. He had found purpose. Not to stay, he decided, but to connect these worlds. Someone needs to translate between them. She nodded, understanding completely. The mentor becomes the bridge. As they stepped outside to look at the stars once more, the distant light of Earth's sun was just barely visible, one small point in a vast, changing universe. Somewhere between that distant home and this new one, an empire was transforming, inspired by a single moment of defiance, a laugh that became a revolution. And in the great cosmic dance of stars and civilizations, that was perhaps the most profound legacy any man could hope for, to stand at the fulcrum of change and push ever so slightly towards something better. Not through conquest, but through heart.